Larry, the Niners fall to 6-9, but they were mathematically eliminated from the playoffs. Before kickoff, they were practically eliminated after that loss to the Rams. So it's not like this is a day of shock to process anything, but I do think every game is a chance to learn something a little bit new about this team, and kind of a tough way to continue what has been the season from hell coming off a narrow Super Bowl loss. Oof.
Yeah, it was a rough game for the 49ers, and, there were some positives. Deebo played a phenomenal game. I mean, he was in a career crisis. He had talked a big game. He had delivered nothing. He had felt the scorn of football players around the league and ex-players and fans and media who were just saying, hey, you look like S and this and that. But he came back and he had a tremendous performance. So Deebo, I thought, was a real positive. But, yeah, the 49ers, just another struggle. And it really is the offensive line. And we can talk about other aspects of the game, the injuries and all kinds of different things. The defense, couldn't stop Achane. But really, to me, it's the offensive line. I don't know if you looked at the numbers, but Purdy with a clean pocket against Miami, 22 of 29, 269 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks. He completed 76%. When the pocket is kept clean, Brock Purdy is ranked as the 6th best quarterback in the NFL as far as EPA per dropback. But when Brock Purdy was under pressure yesterday, he was 4 of 11 for 44 yards, an interception, and 3 sacks. So it really, Kyle Shanahan can't even call a game the way a normal offensive coach calls a game because his offensive line is so bad. They can't move anybody in the run game. They can't run in the low red zone. And so everybody knows they get down to, first and goal from the 4 and they're cooked because they got to pass and everybody knows it.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get into, and then they had some, left side of the offensive line's been ravaged by injury, but I understand what you're saying here. But I want to go back to Deebo because I think that's the, where we're at here. And, Ayuk just signed a big contract extension, so he's not going anywhere. As you look at the wide receiver room, Juwan Jennings, be under contract for another year. You got to develop Ricky Pearsall and get him out of his details a little bit, but the guy's an elite route runner. But Deebo is the guy. And, as far as removing him from the roster, I'm not sure it benefits you financially. But what you saw from Deebo yesterday, and I don't know what the numbers were. I've been so into the Ricky thing, I haven't even looked what Jeff Deeney sent from Pro Football Focus. But he may have broken more tackles yesterday than he has all year. The touchdown run, the catch over the middle, he had 3 broken tackles, the third down on the drive before. I think the difference is getting Deebo downhill. They've been searching to try to get him to go on jet sweeps. He just can't turn the corner. You can see them. They're not allowing him to get his shoulder down. When he's downhill, he can Deebo diesel you. He'll run right over and truck you. And Kyle has told me many times, my goal in life is to get Deebo Samuel the ball in this area of the field with time and space to get him to be able to take it. So I know what Kyle thinks of him. But your thoughts about where Deebo is. He's older now. Just going back into that stadium, and I remember Super Bowl 54, I mean, watch the first quarter of that game. Deebo was all over the call sheet in every way imaginable, running and catching. He looked like that guy again. Is it a one-off? Why was he so effective yesterday, and what do they do with Deebo proceeding forward, do you think, Larry?
Well, I mean, first of all, everybody who just looks at his body type and is like, he's out of shape. He's not out of shape. That's the body that God gave him. He is kind of, uniquely shaped. He's a running back shaped body in a receiver. But every time he struggles, people are like, he's fat. He's out of shape. No, he's not. He's not fat. He's not out of shape. He's lean. He's in good shape. That's not about his conditioning. It's more about what you said. When you're running and you have to read the lanes, you can't run full speed. And, he's got to be, he's a north-south guy. And if you have him going east-west, you're doing him a disservice, and he's not a running back. He doesn't have that kind of vision. He doesn't have that kind of quick twitch to hit the hole and go. He's got build-up speed more than he has first or second step quickness or first or second step speed. So he's really good as a kick returner, like you've seen it. I mean, he's really, really good. I think he's got a great potential as a punt returner still. And I think he's a guy they're going to bring back because, as you stated, Greg, the financial benefits of parting ways with him are nominal. So, especially without Ayuk, I think they're probably going to wind up bringing him back. And then you got to remember that Kyle Shanahan is the ultimate authority here, and Kyle is probably Deebo's biggest backer. I think one thing that you have to be aware of is that the history of NFL players, whether they be running backs or wide receivers, who made their living running through you and not around you, typically shows that their career arc alters dramatically at around 28 or 29. And that's where he's at. So, Jim Brown didn't play forever. For every, John Riggins or somebody like that, there's many, many guys who are done at 28. He's 28. So to expect him to go on and on and on into his mid 30s, or early 30s, I think that's probably asking too much. I think they'll bring him back. I think they've got to complement him better with the other players they have surrounding him. But I think he's back, and I think he probably has one more year in him before he starts to really hit the downside.
Talking to Larry Krueger here on the UMA guest line after the 49ers fall 29-17 to the Miami Dolphins and drop to 6-9 on the year, the Super Bowl hangover year. And there's a couple of silver linings with the 49ers ending their season on January 5th. That is that they can get a lot of rest. They can get healthier. They can recoup a little bit. Kyle Shanahan can go and get out to Cancun or Cabo or give himself a mental break somewhere. But another one is that they can start contract negotiations with guys like Brock Purdy and like Dre Greenlaw and like Charvarius Ward or Hufanga if it comes to that. And we just talked about Deebo Samuel and you thinking he comes back, but the big overarching theme is that Brock Purdy's going to get paid some amount, and therefore they're going to have to get creative with how they fill out the roster around him. So, Krug, I guess what I want to ask you is, what do you forecast in terms of the Purdy negotiations? And I'm not just talking about the number and the AAV specifically. I'm talking about if the 49ers themselves have some PTSD from the holdouts with Bosa and Ayuk and getting this done late, or if Brock Purdy says, hey, look at my body of work. I know I didn't have the numbers of when I got MVP votes 2 years ago, but I still think I'm a reset the market guy.
They're going to have to communicate well with Kyle Strongen, I believe is Brock's agent out of Nashville. They're going to have to communicate where they're at, where they want to be. Why? Because, as you stated, you want to have a holdout with Trent. Okay. You want to have a holdout with Brandon Ayuk. I don't know that I've ever seen a team win a Super Bowl whose quarterback held out. So I would consider strongly they get their work done or contract situation done with Brock. The other, last year there was all these people, let Ayuk play on the 5th-year option. And it sounded great, but it wasn't really an option. And I think the same people who are now this year saying, let him wait a year. I don't think that's an option either. I really don't. I think this is the offseason they're going to have to pay him. He's given them a sweetheart of a deal. They've gotten an incredible player for $1 million a year, and it's time to pay up. And, do I want to pay him $65 million? No. Do the 49ers want to pay him that kind of money? I would probably guess no. But I don't know that you can get away with not paying him in the $50 million range. I don't see how that's going to happen. I haven't talked to the agent, but I know people that have, and he's not going for these 3 years, $40 million, all of it guaranteed, $120. They're not going AAV of $40 million when Dak Prescott's at $60 million. So I think there's potential for Brock to maybe give the Niners some form of a discount so they can build a roster around him that enables him to compete for a championship. But I think you're crazy if you think he's settling for $45 million. I think it's north of 50, probably between 50 and 55. And I think that's the best deal they're gonna get. And even then, that would have to be a little bit of a concession that Brock does not deserve to have cutting edge money like so many other quarterbacks, including Jimmy Garoppolo, got when they signed.
Well, Kyle Strongen is the agent from Rain Sports, and they can start talking to him officially if they haven't already, but they can get him signed to a contract the day after the season ends against Arizona, right. And they have that lead up. So the average annual value is what you're trying to keep down. The way to offset that in any contract negotiation is the length of the contract. If you go out longer. And I can remember when Lee Steinberg did the deal for the extension of Patrick Mahomes, and think about all the things that he accomplished. First full year as a starter, he threw for 5,000 yards and 50 touchdown passes, and then shortly after won a Super Bowl, as we well know, and won the Super Bowl MVP. And what did he sign? I mean, like a 9-year contract extension.
Wasn't it 10 years, 450, something like that?
It was way out there. I mean, enough. I mean, people thought, why is he going that far out? And at least rework the deal. There's always a way to rework it when the player's as good as Mahomes. But my question is, I think the goal of the franchise is to try to keep the average annual value down. Are you willing, to get that accomplished, are you willing to go out and give Brock a 7, 8, 9, 10-year contract to try to keep then the value would be, now how do you, as far as, keeping the guaranteed money, and it's football, it's not like the other sports where they can get out of it. Would you be willing to go out with Brock on a longer term contract to try to keep the AAV down?
Man, it's a tough call, right? Because you would absolutely, for who he is as a person, who he is as a man, who he is as a leader. Like, there's no fears of Brock Purdy away from the field. Sometimes on the longer term deals, you wonder, how's a guy wired? If you take away his motivation, how hard is he going to work? I don't think you got to worry about any of those things with Brock Purdy. He's going to work hard. He's wired right. You know what I mean? He's all about football and competing. So I think they're safe on that, in that regard. Where you may want to hedge a little bit, though, is some of the lack of arm strength that we've seen in the second half of the year, whether it was elbow-related, shoulder-related, fatigue-related, or whatnot, wet ball-related. It's now a thing. I mean, he has consistently struggled to grip the ball and make those throws in wet weather. And, Greg, you asked Kyle about it this week, and you know better than anybody that these championships are won in December and January, oftentimes in inclement weather. So that is not just another thing. It's actually a major thing. And I think that would be the only reason, Greg, that I would prefer a shorter deal, is because there is there's some unknowns a little bit about why we've seen Brock regress. But as I read to you those stats, I believe that the regression is a lot to do with his lack of weapons, lack of speed, and a poor offensive line that he's playing behind.
Krug, just fill in the blank for me. I am blank % confident that Jake Moody will be the 49ers kicker next year.
Wow. John Lynch is very solid and very strong on the fact that Jake's going to be the Niners kicker for a long time. They invested a high pick in him. But in some ways, I think that's backfired because they're looking for certainty. But what it really does is it adds more pressure to his whole presence on the roster, being a third-round pick. If it was my call, I'm moving off. There's too much inconsistency. And I'm looking at Chad Ryland in Arizona, and I'm looking at some of these guys that weren't drafted in the third round, and I'm thinking, you know what? I may want to just try my hand at one of them. But he's got a strong leg. He's got a good disposition. He's solid as a person. I don't want to throw him away, but man, I'm losing patience. I don't know where the Niners are, but that's how I feel.
Yeah, it certainly felt like Kyle Shanahan was losing some patience as well yesterday. And, I guess I didn't answer that. I guess I didn't answer your question there. But, I mean, basically, I would say that if it was up to me, I would not have him back. But I think based on what Lynch has told us, he is going to be back.
I mean, they will bring him to training camp. There's no doubt. Yeah. They're not cutting him off the football team. But the question is, would you bring in other kickers to compete with him? I mean, there's a lot of reasons why the Niners lost the game yesterday. The bottom line was Jason Sanders went 5 for 5.
Yeah.
And Jake yanked that 41-yard field goal. I mean, the right hash mark, usually he's trying to go to the right upright. He pulled that so far, and I thought of that just to sneak over the top of the left upright, but he's got a little bit of an issue, pulling that ball back, and he's got the yips right now with that kick. So they're not going to cut him. But they may, bring in one or two other kickers to compete with him in training camp for the job.
It's probably wise. It's probably wise. I mean, we're all better when we compete for our jobs. We're all better when there's somebody there that could step in if we don't do the job. I think nobody likes that situation, but I think that's the reality is we're all a little better with competition.
Krug, we're going to let you go a little bit early just because we're trying to stay on the clock and we got the guests filling up today. And before we let you go, any final thoughts on the passing of Ricky Henderson, the big topic of today?
Yeah, I mean, I really thoroughly enjoyed your last segment, guys, with Shooty Babbitt, who's one of my very favorite people in the world. All I would say, and, Greg, you're a little too young for this, but Pop and I were there in '89 for Ricky against Toronto in the LCS. And I don't know that I've ever seen I don't know that I've ever seen anybody non-performance enhanced related dominate baseball the way Ricky Henderson dominated the '89 LCS. I looked it up while we were at the break there. He had 8 runs scored and 8 stolen bases in a 5-game series against the Jays. He hit 400 in the series with, wait for it, a .609 on-base percentage. He had either 13 hits or walks in the 5-game series. It was the most dominant I've ever seen a baseball player be without performance enhancers. You got to do something to recognize this guy because in some way we're such a power-based society, but in some way 2 of the greatest baseball players of all time are Ichiro and Ricky, and their skills weren't necessarily power-based, and yet they have to be remembered because they were that special.
As a football talent evaluator, how good of a running back would Ricky have been in the NFL? Seriously.
Yeah. Or how about this? Ricky Henderson could have been the most all-world corner ever. I mean, 5'10", and that kind of explosion, that kind of a speed, that kind of body. Watching Kyler, by the way, a little bit yesterday, I'm starting to appreciate the greatness of Kyler's athleticism. He is super unique, kind of like a Ricky, but no, Ricky Henderson. And if I could tell one quick Ricky story, I was with the Giants in 1998. We're on the road. We're in San Diego. I'm looking for do an interview with Tony Gwynn. And I asked Tony for an interview, and he said, hey, I can't do it right now, but if you show up at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning, I will give you all the time you need. And he walked off with his bats. And I'm standing right there in the clubhouse, and I'm just kind of looking up, and I'm like, did I just get blown off? Does you want me to show up at 7 a.m.? If I show up at 7 a.m.? And I'm looking there kind of perplexed. And Ricky Henderson was on that 98 Padres, and he comes over, and he goes, I can tell what you're thinking, young man. And I'm like, what? And he's like, you're thinking, do I show up at 7 o'clock in the morning, or did Tony Gwynn just blow me off? And he's like saying this, and Ricky, and I'm like, that's exactly what I'm thinking, Ricky. And he's like, well, I know Tony. Tony's going to be here at 7 a.m. He's going to be hitting balls off a tee with Greg Vaughn at home plate. You better be here. So I showed up the next morning at 7 o'clock in the morning. Nobody was in the clubhouse. I thought he blew me off. The clubby goes, he's at home plate with Greg Vaughn hitting off a tee. I went out there, and Tony Gwynn says to me, Ricky told me that you were going to be here. He said he talked to you. He goes, I said, is that young fella going to be here? He's like, absolutely. I talked to him. So Ricky Henderson, just Greg, you had a front row seat for all of it. You have more anecdotes than all of us put together. But Ricky Henderson was a special player, one of the most special people this region has ever produced, one of the greatest athletes this country has ever produced, this area has ever produced. We should never forget how dominant Ricky Henderson was.
Wow, well said. Krug, thanks so much for your time to talk a little Niners and share that Ricky Henderson anecdote. That was awesome.
Love you guys. Have a great holiday to both you,
too,
both your guys' families, and Papa Silver and Lyle and all the people. Guys, have a great holiday. You guys deserve it. You work hard.
Absolutely. You as well, Krug, and we'll talk again soon. Appreciate you.
Yep. Appreciate you guys.